I think we really are all asleep. What we're seeing here is a defining moment for the human race. You know, just today I read a report, a little teeny report in the newspaper. It was the most significant piece of information, sober information the human race has ever had. It was this big. And what the report said is that the Arctic is going to have open waters in 20 years in the summer. We need to understand what that means. There's never been open waters there in 3 million years. We are seeing a cataclysmic shift in the climate of this planet in real time right now. And if our scientists are right, we may see within 30, 40 years, maybe a century at the most, the potential demise of our species. We're really asleep all across the world. It is much worse than the public is being told. Much worse. But what I've realized in the last 30 years is we all got it wrong. We continue to underestimate the speed of climate change because we continued in our hubris not to understand the subtle feedback loops that trigger the next stage. It's moving so much faster than we thought. For example, when you look at the fourth UN climate change report in 2007, 2,500 scientists, 125 countries, it's light years different in its projections than the third report in 2001. Because in 2001, we thought the glaciers were going to melt on our great mountain ranges maybe in the 22nd century. The fourth report in 2007 says they're melting in real time across every mountain range. And in the next 30, 40, 50 years, we'll lose over 60% of the glaciers. This is not about skiing. 1 out of every 6 human beings relies on those glaciers for their water, irrigation, sanitation. How do we repopulate a sixth of the world's population in 40 years? The third report in 2001, you'll recall, said, look to the Gulf of Mexico, we'll see more intense hurricane activity from the heating up of the waters in the planet by the 22nd century. The fourth report, Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike, we are in real-time climate change. We've doubled the intensity of hurricanes, category 3s, 4s, and 5s. And actually, it's not academic. If you live on the Gulf Coast, from Florida to Texas, during hurricane season, every home has the weather dial, TV dial on. Is another hurricane coming? Is this it? Do we evacuate? They can't even get insurance anywhere on the coast for their homes. The third report, the Arctic, said the Arctic may begin to see open waters sometime in the mid-22nd century. The fourth report and the new report this week, open waters clear in the summer 20 years from now, after millions of years. So this is moving much quicker because of all the feedback loops. The projections now is a 3 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, but that's looking optimistic. But every parent should understand what 3 degrees means in this century. If we go up 3 degrees in this century, that takes us back to the temperature on Earth 3 million years ago. Human beings have only been here 175,000 years. We're the youngest species. If we go 2 to 3 degrees, and that's looking super optimistic, we'd have to radically change civilization. At 2 to 3 degrees, the UN Climate Panel reports, models show that we lose on the bottom end maybe 20–25% of all the plant and animal life on Earth. On the top end, wipeout, 70% of all the assessed species gone. Now, we have had 5 waves of biological extinction on Earth in the last 450 million years in the geological record. Every time there was a mass extinction, it took 10 million years to recover the biodiversity we lost. As my wife says, we're not grasping the enormity of this moment. It's eluding us. It's worse now than we thought it was a year ago. For example, in the fourth assessment report, they mentioned the permafrost as a potential problem in Siberia. No studies in. Now the studies are coming in, and we're terrified because Siberia is all covered with frost. Under the frost is a time bomb. It's all the carbon deposits from the pre-ice age, because that was a teeming grassland full of animal and plant life. And when the climate tips, it tips very quickly in a few years. It tipped way back when, and all that carbon was captured under the ice. The ice is melting across Siberia. Carbon is coming up as CO2, and on the lake beds, it's coming up methane, which is 23 times more potent. And there's more carbon underneath there than all the tropical rainforest. It's all going up into the atmosphere. It is a ticking time bomb. And the journal Nature this year said it's accelerating 6 times faster than we thought 12 months ago. That's just one feedback loop. So let me end this part of the discussion with this thought. James Hansen is our chief climatologist in the United States government. He's the head of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. So in Brussels, the EU was going to Copenhagen, hoping to talk the world into mitigating carbon at 450 parts per million by 2050. And nobody wants to play that game. Nobody. Even Obama, who we had high hopes for, their goal by 2020, based on 1990 levels, is a 4% reduction in global warming. The EU on 1990 levels is a 20%. So the Obama administration is nowhere to be seen here. But even if we go to Copenhagen and try to get it to 450 parts per million, the EU says that would maybe keep us at 2 degrees. Devastating, but we may survive. Then James Hansen comes along. His team goes under the oceans, and they looked at the core samples in the geological record, and he said to Brussels, you got it wrong. Because if you try to get the world to mitigate to 450 parts carbon per million, which no one wants to do, you go up 6 degrees Celsius in this century. And this is a quote, the end of human civilization as we've come to know it. That's the chief climatologist for the United States government. I hope he's wrong. My suspicion is the scientists not only are not wrong, they keep underestimating the speed of this. So we have this triple threat, a global economic meltdown, the second industrial revolution clearly on life support, it's old technology, old infrastructure. We have an energy crisis at 147 a barrel, the engine turns off. We've got real-time impacts of climate change, and the UN says we have upwards of 1 billion people on the verge of starvation. I've never seen a moment like this in history. There is no moment like this. So we need to ask the question, what do we do? And what is missing from Copenhagen is we need an economic vision, an economic game plan for the whole human race, everyone on the same page, that may give us the precious time we need to move into a new post-carbon world. A third of the energy used in the world is buildings, and they're a third of the CO2. They're the #1 cause of climate change. By the way, while we're on this, the #3 cause of climate change is worldwide transport. Does anyone know what the #2 cause of climate change is? We never talk about it. The #2 cause is meat production, especially beef. Beef production and consumption is now, our scientists tell us, the #2 cause of climate change, because we have 1.3 billion cows out there. The methane release is enormous, and the nitrous oxide from the fertilizers, and the CO2 from the processing. What's interesting to me is not one world leader in 192 countries has made one sentence statement on the #2 cause of climate change. Al Gore, who I deeply respect, has never made a statement that I know of on the #2 cause of climate change. How serious are we? So what we need to do is we need to begin to move from geopolitics, that's Copenhagen, to biosphere politics after Copenhagen. Geopolitics is everyone's coming to Copenhagen and fighting each other, competing in that old idea that human nature is self-interest, it's me against you, it's win-lose. Geopolitics, post-Westphalia, it's going to fail. Because the reality is we're in one biosphere. We're all interdependent and connected. We all depend on each other for our survival. It is all serves like one big organism, the biosphere. That's not just a metaphor. We have to move from geopolitics to biosphere politics. We have to think as a human species. We have to think as Homo sapiens. We have to create global consciousness if we're going to move this third industrial revolution and create a new civilization, an empathic civilization. It can be done.